we are living in an urbanization trend, right? There's the growing mega cities. People are leaving the countryside and have been leaving the countryside for years and generations and moving more towards cities. Could you maybe touch on that a little bit, and then like maybe also connect it to this growing need for autonomous vehicles, or for just vehicles in general?
Yeah. So cities, the urbanization has continued to grow, ever since the dawn of cities, ever since like the Industrial Revolution, right? Like there's been more and more growth in cities. I think we are about to hit 50% of the global population in cities, or we just hit the 50% of the population living in urban areas. And cities are definitely getting larger and larger. There's been a big question with COVID, will cities go away? I'm a tremendous proponent that will not happen. If you look everywhere throughout history, we like being around each other. And if there's ever been a problem with cities, or people being worried about cities, what typically that means is that you move to the edge of the city. You don't like move out into the middle of nowhere.
Right.
So even with COVID happening, we still like to be around each other. We still like to see each other. And even though we can do things like this, which is absolutely great, I'm like dying to be at a conference where we get to like actually talk to people, and the chance encounters, and also all the energy and activity that cities give, all the opportunities cities give, everything from economic opportunities, but also like social and cultural opportunities. I mean, cities are so important kind of pieces. As cities continue to grow, as we get more and more urbanized, mobility is a key part of the whole equation, right? And some of the questions that have come out, I mean, some of the, why AVs, right? The biggest first answer has to be safety, improvements to safety. If there's not improvements to safety, then there's no reason to really like go through. I mean, AVs are not an easy technology. It's tremendously complicated. It's costly, right, to put together. So unless there's a real benefit that's coming out of this, and increased safety is being one of the most important ones, then that's not going to happen. And then after that, then there's all these other things. Well, you're like, okay, so let's just assume that there's a version of AVs that is safer, right? Then what are the impacts going to be to cities, and how, with this big growth that we're having in urbanization, and urbanization is not just compact cities, but also like sprawl, right? Huge urban agglomerations. What are the impacts going to be on cities? And that's a lot of what we really look at.
Right. And I think you mentioned a couple of them in your TED Talk, right? So before that, one of the first things that I had always heard of is parking. There's something like, you can correct me on the numbers, but it's something like 90% of a car or most vehicles' lifespan is spent parked somewhere, not being used, not being turned on. So maybe you could touch on that, and then we can jump into some of the other ones.
Absolutely. So the vast majority, more than 90% of the time, your car is parked, and unless people are listening to us right now, like as they're driving somewhere, that's where all everyone's cars are. That's like the reality. So and then that parking space is not just, your car's not just in that parking space, but there's a parking space for it, at your home, at your place of work, where you're going to go shopping, where you're going to pick up your kids at school, right? That like there's parking everywhere. So in the US, I don't remember exactly the numbers, but there's something like between 4 and 8 times the number of parking spaces than there are vehicles, right?
Crazy.
And according to Donald Shoup, the high cost free parking, if you haven't ever looked at that, he's fantastic, kind of a guru of what parking is and how it's affected all of our worlds. According to him, the largest single land use outside of in terms of floor area, in terms of a footprint, is parking in most any city, right? And if you've ever worked in architecture, urban design, landscape architecture, you know that form follows parking. It is just an enormous decider of how our cities are organized, where we spend time, how we spend space. Having low density development means that we've got parking in front of us, which means we need these roads, which then means I need parking at the place that I'm going to be going to shop and work, which just expands, the metropolitan footprint, lower density, like huge. AVs have this tremendous opportunity to tremendously reduce parking. So there's been studies that say between 80 and 90% reduction in the amount of parking that we need in any one city. And that is a huge game changer for us, right? So there's just an enormous amount of land that's right now is used for parking that now can get reutilized, right, for other things. So you can, one, as you build new things, you can actually put more density on that space, right? So if I've got a parcel that I want to develop, if I don't need the parking for a vehicle, then all of a sudden I can, build much denser. So one of the biggest limitations on density is not, what the regulations say you can build in terms of units. It's usually how do I fit that with parking? At least in the
Right,
US, this is
right,
definitely the
right.
case. So if you eliminate that, also land that had been existing as parking, you no longer need to have that, right? So all
Mm-hmm.
these empty lots can now actually become development, right? So huge opportunities for doing that. And then another big, fantastic opportunity with this is that parking costs a lot of money, right? We that's usually hidden within the cost of our goods or services, or hidden within our rent.
Mm.
But if it costs a significant amount. So if we no longer need that, then we're actually reducing the cost of housing. So great for affordability. One of the things I should probably mention is why we're going to need less parking. I probably should have mentioned that
Yeah,
before.
yeah, I think it was connected to the idea that we had before, that you were mentioning before, about the shared versus private ownership of these
Yes.
vehicles, right? Yeah.
Well, yeah. So the idea is, I mean, we often say that like Uber and Lyft's, like TNCs, transportation network companies, are like AVs. They just happen to have drivers. And what
Mm.
we mean by that is that the model of how we use them is exactly like an AV. I call it, it shows up, I get into it, it takes me somewhere, I get out, and it goes off and does something else. So AVs are going to be a similar model. Well, what do we see with Uber and Lyft? Well, you just need a huge reduction in the amount of parking that you need for this. I call the vehicle, it comes and gets me, it takes me somewhere, and then it goes away. It doesn't need to be stored right there. It didn't need to
Right,
be stored
right.
where I was, and it doesn't need to be stored where I'm going. And now it's going to be used again, right? So the things that you see is much higher utilization rates, right? So instead of being used 6% of the time, right, a vehicle, maybe you're getting 50% of the time it's actually in use,
Mm.
right? Because now when I'm at my office, someone else is using that same car to go somewhere else. And then you don't need that storage component. And so the this is particularly true if they're shared vehicles, right? So if we all have if the Uber and Lyft model kind of shared vehicles, we can absolutely do that. But even if they're private vehicles, right, there's a chance that instead of needing two cars, maybe I can get away with just having one car, and like it takes me to the office, then I send it back home to, like,
Mm-hmm,
go
mm-hmm.
pick up the kid, or run an errand, or do something like that. So, and the other thing is, even if it is, even if I still need parking, I don't necessarily need it. If it's a private vehicle and I want the vehicle to be near me, I don't need to be at my site, right? It can be half mile away. So, we
Right,
could
right.
create like a place that has, just tons of stacked parking, and we just, everything goes in there, and, we call it as we need it.
Mm.
So it's a really big shift in how we use land in urban environments. And, to me, this is like one of the biggest benefits of the whole AV future, outside of the safety issues, this impact on land use and parking.
Right, right.